We all know of The Sims, but The Sims has had its fair share of spin-offs. I mean, it was a spin-off of Simcity, and it's also had some weird title releases. But I got to thinking, just how many people remember one of the most early 2000s releases of The Sims that we ever actually got? A version of The Sims where will.i.am is somehow a main character, the Black Eyed Peas play in Simlish, and being knockoff Tony Hawk is a valid way to make money. This game is, of course, The Sims Urbz. Now, our story starts back in 2002, where development of a console Sims game was essentially started by none other than Maxis, you know, the guys behind the Simcity series, the Sim series, the guys that made the games. However, during this time, another company, namely Edge of Reality from Texas, were developing their own game, a sort of remake of The Sims, but for the home consoles of that generation, the PS2, Xbox and Gamecube. And as you can imagine, that ended up being released first, and it was a pretty successful affair. So from there it became quite important to have a series to capitalise on the success of a Sims console series, which led to a split of two teams at Maxis. One team to go and make a more conventional follow-up, which was The Sims Bustin' Out as an essential direct continuation of the already existing Sims console game, and another team entirely focused on a spin-off version, that spin-off being The Sims Urbz. Now, this is the version that released over on home consoles, not the portable version of The Sims, which was a completely different studio. You know those guys, Edge of Reality? Well, they made a DS Game Boy Advance version for, The Sims Urbz. So provided you're all with me at this stage and kind of get how weird the development behind this game is, just what was it? To develop publicity in this era, the game's publisher EA thought, well, what better way than get publicity by getting the biggest artist of the year involved with the Black Eyed Peas? So the game ends up featuring them pretty heavily. You'll see later on just how much. Either way, they really did try and cram as much as they could in, with the Black Eyed Peas providing gibberish nonsense, also known as Simlish versions of their own songs. Yep, that was a thing, you can actually buy this as an album. So with about as much backstory as I think I can actually provide about these games, just what exactly does it play like? I mean, this game has a very strange development story. It was a spin-off essentially based around the Black Eyed Peas, but how did it turn out as a game? The Sims Urbz does actually start like a normal Sims game. You make a sim with some less than stellar customization options, which eventually makes sense because apparently the game is meant to make you look like a complete and utter monster. But anywho, once you've made your complete abomination, you actually get to see the story start. See, after being rejected entry to any of the clubs, you are greeted by your boy, will.i.am, who discovers potential in you and gets you in. But from there you somehow have to impress him with a guitar outside the apartment that him and your mum have now got you, and then he introduces you to his friend Darius, the most popular guy in town. And then the game starts. Yeah, you're probably getting how weird this introduction to the game is, complete with messages from will.i.am talking about your mother. Yeah, it's a bit strange, but it does become a bit more of a conventional Sims game after this point. Sort of. See, the game is separated into multiple various areas, in which you can guarantee there will always be a club where parties are thrown at midnight, where you actually need some reputation to get into, a load of new people that sometimes travel between certain areas, as well as a job for you to earn money, a place to buy clothes, people offering you sort of quests, and sometimes villains that will mug you. In fact, I'm pretty sure each district has its own villain, as that's part of the storyline. They also have a place to buy a series of items which you store in your inventory, but that is a lot of information to break down here, so what exactly is the point of this game? Let's start our breakdown with the standard thing you'd sort of expect to do once you head into an area. You've got to befriend the locals, gain a bit of reputation, which is that star down in the bottom left, and that's pretty much the primary part of this game. You've got to be cool and hip with all the people you meet. Unironically, this game is just a stereotype of the early 2000s cranked up to 11. But that's not enough. No, you've got to dress to impress them. That means buying clothes that fit the bill with all the locals, with each new area offering you new clothes, styles, haircuts, tattoos, accessories, which honestly isn't a bad premise of a game so far, and actually encourages you to mix and match from different areas if you're actually got enough reputation to do that. Usually you won't though, and that means that most people won't like you if you're not dressed like them. Anyway though, once you've actually got a good enough reputation, the word about your sim will pass around enough for you to get into new areas and get into that club at midnight. where you get to hang out with that guy Darius from earlier, who will just stand around aimlessly for a little bit until morning comes and eventually leave. He does, however, give you a special power-up. Yes, that's right, the game has power-ups, which you can use to either gain reputation or use it on villains who appear in the area. They act sort of like one of those meta mini-games that you power up to use, but that's all they're really used for. Now, the actual areas, although very similar with what they actually have in them, actually all have a really unique aesthetic, with lots of things going on in the background. It's actually a really impressive game to look at considering the year it came out in. It's not going to blow you away, but it does have a lot of charm. They even have their own music in each area, with tracks composed by both Maxis and, of course, as mentioned earlier, the Black Eyed Peas. Something the game really does deserve credit for is, though, whenever it feels a bit repetitive, or for lack of a word, boring, it'll throw you something new your way to keep you in the mix. But that only lasts so long. You might make it back to your apartment and think, wow, you know, I've ran out of things to do, and then out of nowhere you've got a pet dog just around the place. Yep, pets are a thing in this game. It's actually got a lot of things you'd expect from the Sims series. And as for those apartments, well, you can customize them, and all you've got to do is run to each district, which is a style or type of item you might like, stock up on a load of them because you actually have to use your inventory in this game, and then stick them back around your apartment, which can be a little bit buggy. Needless to say, it really wasn't the focus of this game, and I'll definitely touch on it a bit more later on in the video, but you can customize little living areas in each of the game's own districts, a pretty nifty little feature, albeit not exactly one of the main ones. Progressing through the game, you begin to realise though that although the game tries so hard to keep things different through its new areas, new people to interact with, at its core it can become very repetitive. The Sims itself is a repetitive game. That's not a bad thing though. The problem is, The Sims has things that keep you occupied, whereas this tends to strip them back a bit in favour of the new and hip appearance, and it does become a bit of a grind. You'll find yourself just slumming it in new areas to try and get through to a party at midnight, and then get out of there and onto your next area. Now, don't get me wrong, the game has so many little interactions, animations, and indeed pretty decent characters that you will definitely come back to play it again. And I've sunk a decent amount of time into this game, legitimately playing it and enjoying it, just so that we can see what the game's about. But there is only so many times you can repeat the exact same things and keep it refreshing, until you do in fact need a little bit of a break from the game before you come back. Now, that's the thing, the game really doesn't excel in any real areas. Like, yes, it is The Sims, and you've got needs to fulfill, but unlike The Sims, they're all very basic, and they're all very easily topped up, really. It's likely to encourage you to spend more time living in different areas, but really that just deters you from the 3 unlockable apartments that you're meant to customize and live in. Really, you only use these as a base if you need to level up some of your Sims skills, which you sometimes need to do. One of The Sims' biggest features was where you're meant to spend a lot of time building, and this game doesn't actually give you a decent level of control over where you can do things. Yes, you can move items around, and you can build a few walls, and you can actually move things around a decent amount, but you're not exactly going to be building your own apartment, you're just going to be customizing the one there is. And I did run into a few bugs. Mainly one where a bed kept following my cursor around the screen, a unique issue, but apparently one that people have noticed before. Either way though, the build mode, although a pretty cool concept, you're limited by the items you can actually get a hold of. There aren't actually that many, there's a placement limit, likely down to the console it was actually made for, but hey, you can actually get a photo of that guy Darius for a cool $3,000. But I just mentioned money there, didn't I? Yes, that $3,000 for that Darius poster? Well, you'd need to earn that through the game's various jobs, which are all pretty similar, but occasionally mix it up as you progress through the 3 different levels they have, usually consisting of you mashing 3 or 4 buttons on the controller and then keeping yourself clean fed or awake. You know, the things you'd expect to actually do. And then performing another basic task like cooking or attacking another company's rival business. You know, very standard business things. You progress through the levels doing whatever this is, where you mash the button on one of the 3 machines to level yourself up. They really did go all in on this repetitive monotony to level up and earn money. Either way, it's a neat concept, but the games do feel very repetitive and rushed, and the whole leveling up thing specifically is very, very rushed. But that's really all there is about this game. The rest plays out a bit like The Sims and a bit like an adventure game. It's sort of a weird crossover. And that story I mentioned earlier, well, it sort of splits off into different areas. Now, I'm not going to try and spoil it because it is riveting, but do feel free to skip this part here. Right, so if we're all settled, trust me, I think you're going to need to be for this. From what I've managed to gather of my time spent playing this game, that fella Darius has some sort of secret machine which you can get parts to by defeating all the villains in the game, one in each area, which involves you of course gaining rep in each area and going to all the parties there, something you would sort of expect to do as you play the game. He then allows you access to his penthouse, which is the final apartment which you can customise and create whatever you'd like to do in, and from there you're greeted by all the bosses of each area of the districts you've now saved, and given the key to that penthouse, where you can now sort of do whatever you want with it. From there, Darius then leaves, and yep, that fella on the billboards that you saw an entire city worshipping, yep, he just sort of goes away, and that is all that is the Sims Urbz story experience. Most of the footage you guys have been seeing has actually been from the Gamecube version of the game, as it was the easiest one to actually get footage of the game from. However, it is worth noting that the game also saw an Xbox release which did receive better quality textures, lighting and a few other things, but unfortunately I just can't get a hold of it quickly. It seems to be one of the harder ones to find in my area. The PS2 version is the exact same as the Gamecube version, so if you did want to try that out, feel free. But if you want to try emulating that, well, it doesn't run all too great in my experience, as it is a console game and it never really received a PC port, although there was actually one in the works apparently. See, none of the games run particularly well, with intense slowdown in some areas when a lot of Sims are on screen, and of course that build limit is all down to memory constraints. However, they aren't bad games, the locations all seem to look pretty decent. I can't really get the game to upscale properly in an emulator. You can get the PS2 one to upscale, but then again that has a whole host of other issues with it as well. The game does also have a split screen mode, which is pretty decent, and honestly with some friends, although clunky, I could see it definitely being a bit more fun than the game by itself. So, well, the Sims Urbz. It was a game. It definitely was a game, and honestly, I didn't actually mind spending as long as I spent with it trying to get all the footage for this game, and seeing what the game actually had to offer. I mean, the game was even criticised back by reviewers in the day, some saying it was mediocre, and some claiming it to be okay for certain people. And the game criticised for being a bit rushed and limited a decade and a half ago really doesn't go in its favour as, well, a modern title. But hey, what the game does actually have going for it now is this weird sort of early 2000s nostalgia. The game tries so hard to be cool and hip and whatever it was at the time that it's just ended up with this sort of strange image where only the early 2000s would have thrown money at this. All in all though, the future of the series wasn't what EA had hoped. They were hoping to make off a spin-off series of The Sims with the Urbz line. I mean, the game even got a portable version that a lot of people seem to remember a bit more than the home console version. But anyways, the issue was that The Sims was pretty good as it was, and people just weren't clamouring for a version of the game with the Black Eyed Peas plastered on top of it. Although going gold in terms of sales, the game didn't ever warrant a proper sequel. One was, however, in development and was promptly cancelled, with code eventually going towards the pretty fun, and a game I remember quite a lot, Sims 2 console port, which is a really unique little title, but that is definitely a story for another day. Either way, I hope you all enjoyed this video. People seem to love it when I look back on weird little games and things like that, so I hope you all enjoyed it, and you can always like and subscribe for more.